If you've ever lost a pet, whether through euthanasia, sudden illness, or something completely unexpected, you know how quickly grief gets tangled up with guilt. Did I miss the signs? Should I have done more? Did I make the right call? Even after fostering thousands of animals and experiencing more loss than I care to count, I still found myself drowning in those questions when we had to make the heartbreaking decision to lift up our 34-year-old horse Cherokee. No matter how much experience you have, it is still gut-wrenching because the love, caring, and responsibility we feel for our pets makes their loss really messy. And by the way, you might have noticed that our music sounds a little different today. I wanted to set a softer tone and be a little bit more reflective for this episode because it's a heavy conversation, but it's an important one that we need to have. Stay tuned. Welcome to Muddy Paws and Hairballs, the podcast where we get real about life with pets, the joy, the chaos, and sometimes the heartbreak. I'm your host, Amy Castro, and today we're diving into one of the hardest parts of loving our animals, healing after the death of a pet, especially when guilt and self-doubt threaten to take over your grieving process. To help us unpack all of this, I'm joined by Ken Dolan-DelVecchio and Nancy Saxton-Lopez, the compassionate hosts of the Pet Loss Companion podcast and the co-authors of the book by the same title. Ken is a licensed therapist, author, and grief expert who spent years helping people navigate the unique and often misunderstood loss of a pet. Nancy is a licensed clinical social worker who has supported families through both human and animal loss for decades. Together, they've built a safe space where pet parents can process their grief without judgment, and they're bringing their wisdom and warmth to today's conversation. We're going to talk about why guilt after losing a pet is so common, how to recognize that it is a normal part of grief, and most importantly, how to release that guilt so you can truly honor your pet's life and the love that you shared. So Ken and Nancy, welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you very much, Amy, for
Nice to be
inviting
here,
us.
Amy.
So glad to have you here. Before we kind of get too deep in the questions, I want to share my own little experience and why this episode is so important to me and why, I know we had talked about doing an episode together for a while and it's taken me a while to come back around to it, but I've just had a recent experience that I said, if I'm feeling this way after all I have experienced in rescue, then other people are probably, suffering through. And I'm going to get all choked up again. It's crazy.
Yeah,
So we got this horse named Cherokee. When we bought our house in 2018, the people could not find a home for her and they couldn't take her where she was going. And so I get this phone call the night before closing from the seller crying and asking if I would keep Cherokee. And I thought, because she had lived here for 18 years of her life. She was 34 when she passed away. And so I was like, sure, we'll keep Cherokee. And from there, we ended up acquiring a pony and 3 donkeys, so she had plenty of companions. But she was suffering with Cushing's, and I have had this experience where I've put hundreds of animals to sleep, sadly, and I've seen hundreds pass away in my 14 years of doing animal rescue. But this one was just brutal, and I think what made it so hard was it wasn't a black and white kind of thing. It was really, I had to make a conscious best decision looking at different factors and saying, yes, let's do this now versus waiting versus giving her to somebody else. Why is that decision, well, even when it is black and white, why is that decision so hard for people, do you think?
I think it is because we so don't want to kill
yeah,
our friend. And
Mm,
it's very hard to move from killing to ending their suffering.
mm,
And I think that's just an extremely hard decision for us to make because it doesn't apply anywhere else in our lived experience, really.
mm,
It's not something that commonly happens in our experience with other human beings. And so I think jumping the hurdle of killing to ending their suffering. And then I think, Amy, it's what you were talking about, which is there's so much gray. It feels like there's
yeah,
so much gray. And we have a very hard time coming to a decision of this magnitude when there's not absolute certainty.
that's right.
mm,
It's one of those things where, there's there's so much going on, and you want to make the right decision, but you don't want to make that decision either, right? That's what Ken's saying, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and for your horse, I mean, there was and also interesting when you were saying that, Amy, I'm thinking there were so many other things going on in your life too at
Oh
that
yeah.
time. Right. And when things are going on in our life that are affecting us, then we have a little more uncertainty about what we're really doing or should be doing
Right.
because we're kind of jumbled up with a lot of stuff. And, we certainly don't want our animals to suffer. And Ken and I have done that. We've done this for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Most people either think that they made that decision to end a life too soon or
Mm-hmm.
too late, right? So because there isn't any exact time where you could say yes, this what this animal did, and at this day, and this is what this animal is going through, which means that I need to make that decision, and I'm okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, people are not okay with it.
Right.
And even though they may intellectually think, okay, I guess because the quality of life isn't there, or there are others, I think because because of your circumstances, the horse could not go with you. I think then that was part of with the horse, right? With
Right.
Cherokee. Okay. So then you're thinking, oh, well, I could, like you said, I could give her away, or I could maybe take her. And so that also complicates that decision, right?
Yes.
Hmm.
100%. Yeah. And it's interesting that I literally had the vet scheduled to come out like 6 months ago. She had a really bad summer, and it's like, okay, it seemed physically that it was really, really time. And then she kind of rallied, and then I canceled it. But you're right, the circumstance, and the listeners know that I'm in the process of a move, and I talked extensively with the vet about moving her, and I couldn't take her with me. That would be way too much. But even a neighbor down the street offered to take her. And the vet was pretty adamant that that would probably, in her experience, that generally doesn't turn out well. The herd doesn't accept them. The animal is too
Ah,
stressed from the change in environment because she's been
yes.
here so long. Is that person willing and able to provide because she needed she needed some medical care that was
Mhm.
not cheap, and medication that was not cheap. And so I had all of that going in, and it's interesting you were brought up the timeline is and both of you mentioned it. It's like when it's black and white, it's easier, and it's like it even came down to the fact that here I am, we're sitting here now at the end of February. I made the decision, and I did euthanize her. I think it was 2 weeks ago. I could have waited another month. I probably could have waited another 2 months. I don't know when my house is going to sell, so it was like making that decision to
Right.
just make the decision. What guidance do you give people as far as like how do you navigate through that? And I'll tell you what I did in the end was I ended up I actually looked into Chat GPT and said, ask me some questions that will help me make the right decision. And it was incredible, the questions that it
Really?
asked. But yeah, but because as somebody that does rescue, I could do the quality of life thing. And I
Mm.
realized that, there's certain factors that are just a little more black and white for me, but there was still so much gray and so much
Yeah.
guilt about making the decision.
We do use a quality of life
Yeah.
scale,
Yeah,
but on top of that, that's subjective, right? How do we know that they're having animals can't tell us really. So how do we
right.
know they're having a bad day or not? Or
Yeah,
I mean, we can watch them drinking or their food intake or their mobility, but how do we
yeah,
know when they're in pain, right?
yeah, yeah.
Really?
I'll say that one of the things that I think is most valuable is consultation with other
With a
people.
vet. Yeah.
So
Hmm.
yeah, so you're not alone in the decision, if at all possible. That there's a veterinarian who
Hmm.
optimally has some history with the animal and has some knowledge of where they are now relative to where they are the last time, the last visit, the last few
Yeah.
months, and that you talk the decision over with people who love and respect you and hopefully also have some
Mhm.
familiarity with your animal because it's a major decision and it's
Yeah.
a really
Hmm.
good
Really
thing
hard.
to have support with it. So that's what I think. I also believe that in a crisis, we are apt to be riddled with anxiety. We're at the vet's
Mhm.
office. This happened to me a number of times. I bring my animal companion there. I know they're having a hard time, but now I'm told that I have to make a decision, that they're
Hmm.
dying. And I feel like we need to give ourselves grace and
Hmm.
say, okay, we take the information we got from the veterinarian, we look at them, we get a sense of where they are, we sit with it for a very short period of time because we don't want them to be lingering in great distress. And
Right.
then if we make the decision to euthanize them, we remind ourselves that we made the best decision that we could with the information at hand at that time.
At time. Yep.
Right.
We keep reminding ourselves of that because what will happen is almost always we'll come back and we'll just torture ourselves
Yeah.
with questions. Shouldn't I have taken them home and waited a little while longer? Shouldn't I have gotten another opinion? Should I have taken
Yeah.
them 50 minutes away to the emergency
The
vet
ER.
where maybe they could be in an oxygen tent? Or should I have had the surgery that they said was vaguely possibly going to
Yeah.
actually give them more time? Ultimately, it comes down to just being very kind to ourselves. One of the things that Nancy and I will ask people is if this were a friend of yours who was telling you the story that you're telling us now,
Mm-hmm.
how would you support them? Would you say,
Yeah.
oh my God, did you think of this? Did you think of that? Why didn't you do this? No, probably not. Many people, particularly the kind of people who are so conscientious with their animal family members, are so much more empathic toward others
And there's
than themselves. And so like
themselves.
you can ask them, what would you tell somebody who you loved and respected who is telling you the story you're telling us now? And
Mm.
it can free them a little bit to not be so damning and be so challenging of themselves and try to
Mm-hmm.
be kind to themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I will say this with all the work that we've done. And there are, I mean, when you lose an animal, it is devastating. It is painful. It is sad. But guilt is really difficult
Mm-hmm.
because any, I would say the majority of people who, even if the animal goes missing, even if there's an accident, why didn't I let my cat out that day? Why did I do that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's always there, and it's really hard to work through because, like Ken, I was saying, we can't take it away from you. But
Mm-hmm.
hopefully, as you talk about it and as you work through it, that you will eventually be able to forgive yourself and
Yeah.
incorporate the loss. Because guilt is just, it's really a difficult and challenging emotion to go through. And most of us have it with our animals,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know?
and with people too. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yes.
with the
With
people
people.
too.
Yes.
It's
Hmm.
a similar process that we go through in making some of those decisions. I want to hit a couple of things that you mentioned. First of all, like Ken, you had mentioned about the veterinarian being able to guide you. And I have many fantastic veterinarians because of the rescue for various types of animals. The challenge that I think people might run into, and maybe you can address this, is that it's fairly rare, unless it's a real black and white, that the veterinarian will say, yes, I think you should do this today. I literally told the vet when she came out here, I'm probably going to euthanize her, but bring her Cushing's medicine, like 6 months worth, just in case I change my mind. Like I was still
Yeah.
I was still, because I wanted her to look at her that last time, but she would say things like, I support you in this decision. I don't think it's a wrong decision. And when I start, and maybe this is just the
Right.
communication maniac in me. There's a big difference in saying I support you in this decision, or it's not a wrong decision, and saying it is the right decision. You should
That's
absolutely do
right.
this
I
today.
get
and
it.
it, and
Right.
it makes so that makes it a little bit hard. And I can understand why they wouldn't want to do that, because they don't want to add to that guilt and that feeling that you feel, because it's like, oh, I could have waited till the weekend when my daughter came home from college or something like that and could have said goodbye to the pet, or things like that.
It's really difficult for veterinarians because many
Sure.
years ago, they would say, right? I
Mhm.
think that they were more apt to say, no, I think you need to do this. But they got so much pushback, right?
Mhm.
And people would get really angry and they wanted to know, but they didn't want to know, right?
Mhm.
So what they do is really what your veterinarian is doing. Well, it's not a wrong thing. And they're thinking, well, you're not saying you should do it, So there's a
Yeah.
lot of question around that, but they are taught now not to really say too much. Now, that said, some people will say, well, what would you do to the veterinarian? What would you do if it was your animal?
That's
Hmm.
my question to them
I
always
was
at that
I
moment.
was just thinking the
Yeah.
same thing
Yeah.
because
And
I always ask that question.
what my veterinarian has said, and this has happened on 3 occasions, I guess, in the last several years. What she'll say is, well, clinically, there is no path to health here, but
Mm,
you love her, so you have to decide. She'll always make that decision. She'll say, clinically, this is the way it looks, and
yeah.
she's not going to get better, but you have
Right.
to make the decision. And then she'll kind of look at me like, do the right thing, Ken.
Yeah.
and and
You read between the
yeah,
lines, right?
and
Yeah.
I find that
Wink, wink,
I'll
nod,
always say
nod.
that.
Right.
I'll say, what would you do if she were yours? And she'll be pretty clear about it. I mean, pretty
Hmm.
definite. Like I would let her go. I would ease her out.
Yeah.
And I always feel like they won't tell you what to do because they fear liability. They fear a lawsuit.
Yeah,
Mm,
right.
As
yeah.
as we are an incredibly litigious society,
Yep,
people sometimes get
unfortunately.
outrageously emotionally overwrought in their recriminations. And they'll
Hmm.
say, well, you told me. And
Yeah,
so I can understand that. I also think it's important for people to realize the position that the veterinarians are in and to not
yeah,
see them as a God figure or somebody who has the ultimate responsibility, because we do have the responsibility. And that's why I think that the guilt is so profound. And I
yes,
think
Hmm.
the guilt is
exactly.
so profound because we've had responsibility for every aspect of this animal's care and
Yeah.
life, what they eat, what they do during the day, the environment in which they live, food we give them, the medication we give them, the company they keep. We are in control of all of that and we're
Right.
responsible for all of that. And so many people feel, I believe, that we should be responsible for preventing their death.
The death.
And I think that this also ties into the fact that mainstream culture is incredibly phobic about the reality of death.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And we need to get more comfortable with the reality that every living thing dies. Every one of our
Right.
animal companions is going to die. We're going to die. Our friends are going to die. Our children are going to die. We're all going to die. And that is not a catastrophe. That is
Here's
simply the
life.
law of nature.
Mhm.
And we
Hmm.
do not have control over it. And I feel like people just beat themselves up because their
Mhm.
animal died. And, really the question is, you didn't expect this to happen. Like,
Right.
most of our
They
animal
didn't want it to
companions,
happen.
yeah, most of our animal companions have much abbreviated lifespans compared to us.
Right.
And so when we adopt them into our family, we know that we're likely to lose them.
Yeah,
And it's very important to just keep that in mind. And as the time approaches, to realize that we cannot prevent this from happening. We can
Hmm.
we can make decisions about how to help it happen in the most comfortable fashion, and we could take the best care of them through illness and infirmity, but we
Hmm.
cannot prevent them from dying. And
die.
really the last gift, the way I see the last gift that we give them is a as painless as possible a transition when there is no path forward. I remember making this decision with my mother when she was the very end of her
Hmm.
life, and I was having a conversation with my brother who wanted to do everything possible, including coding her again, the defibrillator, which had really traumatized her. And I remember saying to him very pointedly, I said, our task now is to help her die as comfortably as possible.
Mm.
There is no path back to health. That is
Yeah,
not possible. That's why we're in hospice. We don't want to just create more trauma for her. She is transitioning
she's
out of
ready to
this
go.
life.
Mhm.
And that's what happened. Our animals, if we're lucky, if they're lucky enough not to be killed in an accident or an emergent medical crisis, that's where we're going to end up with them.
Right. Right.
Sometimes, I mean, Ken, there was one of our people that came on the podcast, and he's still struggling. And it's complicated because I think Amy with Cherokee it was a little complicated, right?
Hmm.
So his animal was elderly, had dementia, and had mobility issues. Okay, And this was his soul dog, right? He loved this dog. But he was the only one taking care of the dog. And there were issues in the family, and they're like, oh, the dog's up all night because he's sundowning and all this. And
Mm-hmm.
he had a bad back. It was really difficult. There were so many things. When he had decided maybe we should euthanize him, the vet came, love this vet, know her, great vet. But what happened is he asked, is this the right thing? And she said, well, look, the dementia is going to be a problem. Maybe he has another few weeks around his mobility, right?
Mm-hmm.
He chose to euthanize him, and then boom, it was like he could have had a few more weeks. Why did I do this? Why did
Mm-hmm.
I do this? She said that. And so he care. I had to work really long time with him,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of go through that guilt, because after obviously the death, he was not doing all that physical work. He felt better, and the more he felt better, the more he believed that he did the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And this is what guilt does to us. And like Ken said, it's really hard, and we have to slowly work through it and not be so hard on
And
ourselves.
I think that's
Yeah.
that's an important point, Nancy, that with the death of a loved one, there are also some changes that we experience as relief,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
as opportunity. And that doesn't mean that we don't grieve for them.
That's
It
right.
doesn't mean
Mm-hmm.
that the loss is not very important to us. And it doesn't mean that we're betraying
We're
them.
betraying them.
It's
Right.
just the
Mm-hmm.
way life changes.
Yeah.
And this is something, again, that people feel like, did I do this to free myself from this burden? And they have to go back and say, no, I
At
did
the
it
time,
because it was
Mm-hmm.
the appropriate thing to do to end their suffering. I mean, to me, the phrase that keeps coming back is end their suffering.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you do.
hmm
Yeah.
And as you said, one of the things that you notice over time is how many people think they did it too soon and how
yeah.
many people think they did it too late. There are
Mm-hmm.
some people who are absolutely okay with the timing. You
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
do hear that with some regularity, but it's much more likely that there's like this whole swirl of recriminations of woulda, shoulda,
Yeah.
couldas. And I've said this many times. One of the things when I get any of those kinds of feelings, I
Mm-hmm.
look at the boxes that have their ashes. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a little morbid maybe, but it immediately
Mhm.
orients me to the fact that they're not here anymore, and this is not helpful
Mm-hmm.
because there's nothing good that will come from this chewing on this emotionally more
Beating
and more
yourself
and
up.
more. And
Yeah.
so the reality is you did the best that you could at the time, and their life is over. We don't know what that means ultimately for any of us, but
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to change that. There's no way to change it.
Right.
But you're also never going to forget them, right?
Never going
We
to
talk a
forget them. Yeah.
lot. These animals are so important to us, right? They give us such gifts and such love. And you can't have a relationship with a human like you can with an animal.
Right.
So it doesn't mean that they may be gone and that's devastating and there's guilt around it, trying to work through the guilt, but they're always with us.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
we have to remember that because they gave us that wonderful life with them for so many years, even if, and sometimes, I mean, people get really angry when it's so soon, when something happens when they're young.
Yeah.
But if they're older and have gone through a lot of life, it's a little bit different, but they
Right.
still have given us so much,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Definitely. Yeah. And do you think so? Because Ken, you had mentioned, when people question themselves and they say, did I do this for me or did I do this for them? I, and maybe I'm wrong I don't think I am, but I feel like I did it when I did it for both of us. I think it
Hmm.
was time.
Okay, that's fair.
Could she have gone on longer? But we did an episode with the founder of Lap of Love a while back, the home hospice and euthanasia, and she said, and I'm not going to quote her exactly, and I don't know if this is what her saying or from somewhere else, but better a week too early than a day too late. And Ken, you kind of alluded to that as well. And so part of my thinking was kind of going back to the questions that I asked myself, like, quality of life for her, because there obviously it's different for dogs, and I think it is important. And Nancy, you had mentioned, that there are tools that you can look at as to
Yeah.
does your pet have quality of life, and that was one of the things that I went back and asked ChatGPT was, for a horse, remind me what are those elements, and horses are herd animals. Her entire herd had been systematically kind of removed. The pony got adopted, the donkey got adopted, the other donkeys got adopted because we knew she wasn't going to be going anywhere.
Right.
And, as much as I would look out the window every morning and hope, oh, she's laying down, maybe she, I hoped I wouldn't have to make that decision.
Yeah.
It ultimately came down to the fact of, yes, it was her, like Ken said, her health was not going to get better. The vet had mentioned the summer was coming and it was going to be brutal because of the the heat is just a lot for a Cushing's animal to handle. And then, but there was a little bit of self-serving in there as well, because although she was not hard to take care of, here I'm trying to sell my house. I've got this old kind of sickly looking horse. I didn't want people to come and think, oh, you're not taking care of that horse. And as morbid as this sounds, I thought about the fact of if I wait till the very, very end, if I'd waited another month, let's say, now I have this big burial mound in my pasture and everybody's going to say, what's that? And now I've got to tell them there's a dead horse in their backyard kind of thing. And, I didn't want to have those conversations, or I didn't want people to feel uncomfortable. But one of the things that I kind of console myself with is what would have been gained for her to keep her around for another month or 2 months or whatever. She's out there by herself. I don't know exactly how she was feeling, but I can't imagine at 34 with Cushing's and, not having many teeth left, she probably wasn't feeling awesome,
Right.
like she probably felt when she was 6 or 7 years old. And so what would I have gained by allowing her to stick around a little bit longer? Maybe I'd felt a little less guilty. I don't know. I mean, I guess part of that is how do you talk yourself through that guilt? Like I have these little conversations where I play my own devil's advocate to try to make myself feel better. What else can people do to navigate that guilt?
Well, I think one of the things you can do is you can remind yourself of the care that you gave all of those years and how deliberate the decision was and all of the consultation you had, and that point which the person from Lap of Love, and I think that's a brilliant way to put it, better a week too early than a day too late. And also think of the fact that indeed your needs should figure in
Yes.
to the formula. They really
Yeah.
should. I mean, if you have an animal that you simply cannot manage to care for anymore and they are at death's door, you need to take care of yourself too, because you deserve to have the capacity to live a healthy existence as well. And all these things are on a continuum. That's what I think makes it so challenging. I mean, we've heard one of the classic stories that Nancy tells is that the people brought their cat to the vet and asked that it be euthanized because it no longer matched their new furniture.
That was true. True story.
I've heard things like that myself.
That's at one end of a continuum of, I have needs too.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about is this infinitesimally small other end of the continuum where you have to balance the fact that you have to manage your life too. And so this comes up, we see this a lot with people who simply cannot pay for what would be needed
Financial
next.
issues.
They would
Yeah.
become destitute. We recently had a person tell us that their animal, it was going to cost over $2,000. The animal was very sick. They didn't have any more to their name than $2,000. They would literally be destitute. And they decided to euthanize. And what we said to them was, you made the right decision because you need to live. You need to have shelter. You did the best you could, which is another way of thinking about this. We do the best we can
Right.
with all the resources that we have, both internally inside ourselves and accessible to us in the world. But again, I see that as long as that's navigated thoughtfully and deliberately, that idea of, we're going to be moving and they're in the process of near death and, it would probably be a good thing for this to happen before the closing on the property that we're selling. All of that is reasonable because they don't have much time, and you need to have an organized life that makes sense too.
Mhm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's all of that, again, as long as it's deliberate and it is not just like flippant, like, there's a Monty Python skit where the family is going away on vacation, and one of the family members says, "Well, we have to put the cats down." And one of the other ones asks, "Well, why?" And they said, "Well, we wouldn't want to come home to a dead cat."
Mm.
No, I mean, it's like that, and that's a joke in that, but like
Yeah.
that would be that other end of the continuum. Well,
Yeah.
we're kind of done with them. We don't
Yeah.
People who give away their pets because they get to be like
Yeah.
7 years old and they're not able to go
Yeah.
running with them
Puppies.
anymore, maybe
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
Yeah.
That's that other end of the continuum. But we
Yeah.
deserve to pay attention to our own needs too and figure them in. That's the
Yes.
way I think about it.
Yeah. Well, and you were talking about the financial aspect of the paying for whatever, a procedure, medication, or whatever to buy what for that pet. It's like,
Yeah.
you now have put yourself in debt so your pet could have 3 more months of moderate quality of life. Like, is that really a
Right.
good thing? Or you even, Ken, before you mentioned the gentleman with the sundowning, I have a soft spot for the oldies, and we've taken in several older pets, and that sundowning is not for the weak of heart. I mean, it
Right.
is, you lose a lot of sleep. The older dogs, you have urinate, you're constantly cleaning up pee, you're putting diapers on them, and it's like,
Yep.
at what point is enough for both of you? But you're right. At the other end of the spectrum, I remember being appalled when I used to volunteer at animal control in a town over from here. And this very nice looking couple came in, and they were super excited about the fact that they were retiring and they were going to hit the road in their RV, and they wanted to bring their cats in to euthanize them. Not to give them up for adoption even. They just wanted to euthanize them. And I think the cats were like 10 and 12. It's like, I just want to punch you in the face. I'm sorry. That's just wrong. Like, I
We get it. We see
figure it
it.
out. Yeah, I'm sure you see it. Yeah, and we see that all the time with with people coming to the rescue to relinquish pets for what I feel are not the best reasons. But
Reasons.
maybe that pet's better off.
Well, whenever I hear that kind of story,
If
I'm
that's
like,
the way you feel
what kind
about
of
it.
life were they living if
Yeah.
Yeah,
they were
Right.
just like an ornament
yeah,
in the home?
disposable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if somebody is working through this process and they're struggling with the guilt and they've heard what we've said so far and they're still struggling with it, how important is it for people to seek out help, community support? And you had mentioned something earlier, Ken, about talking with trusted people. I have found, and this was in my experience when my husband passed away. I was literally on my way to the hospital, and he was going to be put on a ventilator, which was kind of the beginning of the end. And but he was conscious, and he was part of that decision. And I got a phone call from somebody, and instead of, I said, "Oh, this is what I'm doing. I'm heading to the hospital for this." And she's like, "Well, did you ever go see that doctor I recommended?" And I was like, "Yeah, no." "Oh, well, you really should have. She could have cured him." And it's like, this is not what I want
Oh
to hear right
boy.
now. Like,
No.
what a nut! And the doctor
Uh-uh.
she was referring to was a total nut job, like, a snake oil salesman kind of person. And it's like, so my point with that is, you do need to be careful who you reach out to. And not
Yes.
that I
That
reached
is
out to her,
exactly
but
right.
who you share this experience, because not everybody is going to give you the compassion and helpful communication that you need. But where
Well,
can people find that support?
well, there's websites. There's a lot online now.
Hmm.
About like petlaws.org, petlaws.com, APLB, the Association of Pet Laws and Bereavement, podcasts, Ken and I do ours,
Yes, we'll
um,
definitely put links in the show notes to your
it does
podcast for sure.
it helps people. I don't think, like, I can we were talking about this last night. Everyone that has written to us that we share on the podcast, right? Like Amy,
Hmm.
um, they say, thank you so much for doing this because we really appreciate that we don't feel so
Alone.
alone.
Isolation
Mm.
is one of the most painful aspects of grieving. And I'll also mention that I facilitate a Zoom pet loss group. It's usually on the second Tuesday of the month, and it
Hmm.
runs from 6 p.m. Eastern to 7:30 p.m. It's a Zoom meeting. It's for anybody who across the world may
Hmm.
benefit from coming together. We cap it at 50 people. We usually get about 25 to 30 people, and it doesn't cost anything. And it's something to see that there are people from everywhere, that there might be an English speaking.
Yes.
We have people from the UK, from Ireland. There's always people from Australia. We've got recently a person from Saudi Arabia, from Singapore, and they share strengths. Basically, they share stories, they share strengths.
Mm.
There are different points in the journey of coming to terms with their loss. But those kinds of opportunities are really important. I want to just stress something, and Nancy and I have said this many times. Be cautious about who you share this with in the
Yes.
workplace,
Oh
Right.
yeah. It's
because
just a cat. You can get another
yes,
one.
Right.
yes, and sometimes people, they may have a supervisor who seems very empathic and connected and whatnot, and they tell them about this, and now the supervisor thinks that they're nuts and
Mm.
won't give them a new expanded role, doesn't see them the same anymore, questions their competence. We've heard this too many
Wow.
times to not mention it.
Right.
And I'll also say that, one of the things that I feel like you experience is comes back to, again, our society has grown so shielded from death
Mhm.
and from negative feelings. There's a
Mm-hmm.
great book by a journalist. She recently died 3 or 4 years ago, Barbara Ehrenreich. Barbara Ehrenreich wrote a book called Bright Sided, and it's about the culture of positivity in our society. The idea that you're always supposed to be happy and up and
Mm.
energized. And if you're not,
This
well,
is
you just
true.
need to get with the program. And it's really, there's a whole school of psychology called positive psychology, which I've always seen as being really problematic for this
Mm.
reason, because life includes a full palette of emotions, the good, the
Right.
bad, the painful, the confusing, the awestruck, the awesome. But
Yeah.
we have a culture that has grown so apart from negative feelings. And I also often mention this, that one day I opened up my AOL account. This was quite a many years ago, and there
I
was
was
a
gonna say you're dating yourself
yeah.
now,
I
Ken.
don't really use AOL. I use Gmail. Let's just be clear. So
Yes, you do,
so
because I
so
can
um
confirm that. I emailed him earlier
so
today.
so and there was a headline that said worst catastrophe for Julia Roberts, and I clicked on it, and her like 91-year-old mother had died. And while that is sad and painful, it is not a catastrophe. And I
Right.
felt like we were being infantilized. Like that headline was so infantilizing. Like we're not children. We know that people die. And
Hmm.
that is not a catastrophe. And I felt like it was so emblematic of the very childish way that mainstream culture approaches many things, death among them.
Mm.
But there are people who, like, when they hear a story that somebody is dying, or their animal companion has died, they find it so rattling that they can't be empathic. They can't just be with you in
Hmm.
your distress. Many people, they're not practiced at being compassionate.
Mm.
No.
That is a fact.
In order to be compassionate, you have to be able to tolerate being in the presence of somebody who is in emotional pain.
Mm.
Right.
And if you're not used to being in the company of somebody who has emotional pain, and just knowing that you can tolerate what that stirs in
That's
you,
right.
Mm.
then your impulse is to push it away and to say things
Right.
like, well, they were very old and they were
Hmm.
very sick, and maybe you'll get another dog soon, and they're in a better place now. All kinds of things
All kinds of
that
crazy
are
things.
actually going to be experienced by the person who's grieving as dismissal.
Yeah,
Most,
exactly.
pretty much like you're dismissing how I'm feeling right now, when really all that you can do that's helpful is just bear witness and be
Hmm.
with them.
Yes, you can only listen. And that's hard for people because, like Ken, you said, they don't want to deal with their own pain. They don't want to deal with bad things, right?
Yeah.
So they get really nervous or anxious and they say things that they mean well, but don't mean well. I mean
Right.
in the context of the person, right? And that makes it more difficult. So
Because
in
it
the
increases isolation. It
right.
just it pushes the isolation for.
Right.
Right.
So and it's also important for grief in total to try to be gentle with ourselves, right? This is what we've been talking about with the guilt, but it goes along for all of those emotions. And
Mm.
it's really hard to take care of ourselves, but it's really important to do so. To try to eat well and to get some rest and to do some exercise. A lot of times it's very difficult to do that.
Yeah.
But, but the gentleness, the giving ourselves a break, taking care of ourselves, loving
Mm.
ourselves. because this journey, the grief journey, is very challenging. And
Mm-hmm.
it can be very difficult and complicated depending on the
Yeah,
death,
it
right?
comes and
Yeah.
goes. It's not
Yeah.
linear. It takes whatever time it takes. There's nothing wrong with you if it takes a long
Yeah.
time.
Well, let me ask about that because that's where my mind was going. I was thinking about what you said about not sharing at work and how somebody might perceive you differently because you're feeling these big feelings about something that they don't think is maybe of value or deserving of those big feelings. At the same time, is there a place where somebody has gone from quote unquote normal grief, even though there is a spectrum, to a point where they should be seeking
Yeah.
help
Help.
beyond, maybe beyond a group, like a grief counselor or a psychologist or
Yep.
something like
Yep.
that, because they're just stuck or their own quality of life has now been negatively impacted.
Well, that's complicated grief. There is such a thing.
Hmm.
And so, yes, at that juncture, if it's gone on and it still is intense in 6 months that has been, in the beginning, there's something else happening
Hmm.
there. And it would be important for someone, especially around animal loss, to find a pet loss counselor. Because
Hmm.
even grief counseling, which is really it's a difficult thing to do, but grief counseling in general does not necessarily address pet.
Mm.
I mean, you could get a therapist who's really good with grief counseling, but they don't quite understand the nuances with
Mm.
companion animal loss.
Okay.
So, it would be helpful to look for an actual pet loss counselor then.
And I would say
Okay.
also that there's no downside to getting therapy,
Yeah.
counseling. I mean, we're both
Good
therapists.
point.
We've been in therapy ourselves over and over again. I'm a crazy person in many ways.
Aren't we
And
all? I don't
yeah,
know. I think we all are.
I don't feel like that's a bad thing. I think it's just part of the human condition. Your mental health
Mhm.
is a continuum. I don't believe that there are mentally ill people and there are mentally well people. I think we are all floating around on that
Well, on a
continuum.
continuum.
And
Yeah, I know.
we go to different places, just like all aspects of health, the physical, the social, the social, the spiritual, the financial, all of that. And so we deserve self care, and that often
Yeah.
comes in the form of a therapist or a counselor. I will
Mhm.
tell you, though, one thing that I always keep in mind is if you are incapacitated,
Hmm.
you can't crack a smile for a
You
period
can't
of
get out of
two
bed.
Or you
weeks or
can't go to
more.
work or,
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you're incapacitated, you need to see a therapist.
yeah.
If you start having self-destructive fantasies or
Oh, you have to
plans
go
or
to a
you're actually
therapist.
hurting, you need to see a professional. And not
Mhm.
only, but the language that I always use is deserve. You deserve to see
Mhm.
a professional, just like you would see a specialist in any other kind of medical care.
Yeah.
You deserve to see a therapist.
Yeah. That's good. Definitely good advice.
Mhm.
All right. So to wrap things up, I want to switch to not that, this is all positive and good advice, but maybe a happier note to end on. And we did an entire episode. I think I'd mentioned this to Nancy in our back and forth communication about, memorializing our pets and the things, the products and the things, ceremonies, things like that. But what have you seen from people, since you're working with people in this area and you've got your groups, any particularly unique or interesting ways that you have found that people have, number one, honored their pets, but made that something that helped them to move? I don't like to use the word move on, but I
Oh,
like to
but
focus
to
on
move
moving
forward
forward.
and to
Yeah,
and to
exactly.
incorporate the loss. I mean,
Exactly.
a lot of times, we've got a lot of gardens, memorials in the backyard, the little plaques, the dogwoods, or the butterfly bushes, right? All of that with a little,
Hmm.
you see. It's really the other day I was working with someone through the death of her cat, and the vet said this, and I wasn't aware of this. I know that a lot of people are getting jewelry now. You
Hmm.
can have ashes put into different types of jewelry.
Hmm.
She said that tattoos are now taking
Yeah,
ashes.
yeah.
I did not
Oh,
know
wow.
Oh,
that.
the tattoos are including ashes.
Yeah.
Wow, that sounds interesting.
So
I would
I
have to
had
talk
not
to my
heard that.
doctor about that before I
Yeah.
did that.
That
Um,
sounds a little unhygienic, but who knew?
But who knows, right? I mean, it's
Yeah, who
something,
knows?
if yeah, but I think that just shows the wide range, from
yes.
the more common. I kind of went back and forth on this because I've seen a lot of videos. There's a if anyone wants to cry, you can go and try to find a video about the horse with no tail. But a lot of people will take their horse's tail.
Yes.
And I was like, I don't, I was kind of torn about it. Like, what am I going to do with her tail? But in the end, I thought I have this one opportunity. And then it's not going to be available to me. So I did
That's right.
cut some of her hair. I don't know what I'm doing. It got stuck in a moving box. And, but the young woman that I had, her name was Gia. She actually works at a funeral home in Charleston, South Carolina. I'll put the information back in the show notes on that. But her beloved horse passed away, and it was very sudden. And she had the tail hair made into a bracelet. So it's amazing the products that are available. Another thing that Dr. Mary from Lap of Love had mentioned was, people doing kind of a last party for their pet and things, kind of an Irish wake type of
sure,
thing.
yeah.
But, before or after the
Yeah.
pet. But I think, finding those kindred people to celebrate the life of your pet, and then whether you do anything with the ashes or not, or whether you do something with the paw print, no harm, no foul to get it done, and then you can decide later on what you want to do. But I think it's something to consider if you even think you might want to do something later on, like you said, a piece of jewelry or something like that. Go ahead and get the ashes back so that you have that opportunity.
And there's, I mean, Ken and I, we've been through this a lot. So a creative endeavor, writing a poem, writing a song, doing scrapbooks, having a little place in the house. Like a lot of people have their little ashes in different. I have teapots, right?
Yeah.
So
We
I
have
have
all the
little
little
teapots,
boxes
Oh, that's cute.
and hair.
and so, or a memorial garden, have little plaques or something. Or we had years ago, there was a man who made guitars, and he literally took a white guitar and had his dachshund's portrait on it.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I mean, there's all kinds of
So
things.
many great. One of the things I've heard a lot recently that I think is very interesting is people carrying artifacts from their dog. So they might go for a walk and they've always got their dog's collar in their pocket
Right.
or around their wrist, or they keep their tags. It's very interesting to me. We've seen more and more of that where they do these rituals of repeating and going to places that were familiar to them with their animal companion, but they've got something of their animal companion
Yeah.
with them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just very, very interesting to hear how meaningful that is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's also okay for people, like one of the things that I have started, I mean, I did take the tail hair from Cherokee because, I mean, she's literally the only horse. I had a horse when I was in junior high, but like other than that, she's been my only real, adult horse. But when I look at dogs and cats, I've had a lot of pets, and I noticed that at one point that I had an awful lot of those plastic boxes just lined up on the same shelf with my shoes in my closet. I know that sounds terrible. They were not being honored, and it's like, okay, how many pets' ashes am I going to stack up? And like, am I going to have to buy a storage unit for these at some point? So what I did was I couldn't quite just throw them away or get rid of them, but what I did was I took like a little bit from each one and put them in one box. So I still have them. I didn't, but then even with my last few pets that I've had to euthanize, I got the little paw print that the vet does, but I did not get their ashes back, and I don't feel guilty about that because it's
Right.
like,
Oh, yeah.
because
This is how you do it.
this is how I decided to do it. Now
Yeah.
it's getting the
It's
ashes
okay.
back made me feel better back then. I don't feel that need now. It's okay to change. So I just want people to realize that no matter what you do, it's about
It's
your
fine.
your pet is gone. So it's about what brings you comfort. If it brings you comfort to have them, great. If you don't need that and the memories or the photographs or whatever you've got are good enough, then fine. It's not about what other people do. It's about what makes
No,
you
it's
feel
about
right.
how you want to do it and how many times you want to do it.
Right?
It
What
doesn't
feels
matter.
right to you, and it could be very different in different circumstances. One of my cats is buried in my garden, and I planted a whole bunch of coreopsis on top of her. So it's perennials always. Whenever I go by there, I say hello to her. Others of my dogs are all in their little boxes of ashes, and chickens I take up and leave for the coyotes up at the woods when they
There you
die.
go. I mean, that's
And
such
to
a
me,
difference.
like, yeah,
Cycle of life.
it's
Yep.
but just whatever makes sense to you individually, and because there are not prescribed rituals the way there often is in a community of faith for human beings. Like if you're a part of a particular sect of Christianity or whatever other faith, there's often, when we die, there's an expectation that there's a certain pattern of ritual that you're going to go
Right.
through. That doesn't happen with an animal
No,
companion.
although it could. People
It
have
can,
funerals
yeah.
for their,
Yeah.
for their
They
dogs.
can,
or-
but
Yeah.
but so we have to we do what feels right for them and for us at the time.
Right, right. So for somebody that is going through this right now, either they're contemplating having to euthanize a pet or they just did it and they're in the thick of things, any final thoughts or advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, for me, grief is about putting one foot in front of the other, and you keep going, and you try to be as loving and gentle, as we both said, toward yourself as you can be. And also just accept that this is what you signed on for. The flip side of love is grief, and we will experience it many, many times in life with all of our important relationships. And in the end, far down the road, we're wiser and stronger, usually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, it's a process. All of the emotions are valid. They're always valid. It's going through the process of them and trying to take care of yourself. The last task of mourning is to take in the loss in your daily activities so that you've incorporated the loss into you and that you can go through your life again. Will you always grieve? Yes, we always grieve. We always think about those who have died.
Right.
But what they're saying now, the amount of grief is equal to the amount of love.
Well, Ken and Nancy, thank you so much. I feel like I had just had a therapy session with you both. You can send me a bill afterwards. But I appreciate your experience and your wisdom and advice, and I hope that everything that we talked about today is super helpful to
Yeah,
those
to
of you
everybody who
who are
listens.
listening. Because, it's interesting. We've done a couple of episodes, like one that was really, one or two that was really directly about the death of a pet. And they always tend to be, I call them the slow burners, because it's not like everybody says, woohoo, I can't wait to go out and listen to that. But it's there when you need it. And
That's right.
And those have been to me, they've been some of the best episodes that we have done on this show, including this one, I think, too. So thank you so much for being here with us
Thank you.
today.
Thanks so much for the
Yeah,
opportunity
thank
to
you,
share.
Amy, so much.
Thanks for listening to Muddy Paws and Hairballs. Be sure to visit our website at muddypawsandhairballs.com for more resources, and be sure to follow this podcast on your favorite podcast app so you'll never miss a show. And hey, if you like this show, text someone right now and say, I've got a podcast recommendation. You need to check the show out, and tell them to listen and let you know what they think. Don't forget to tune in next week and every week for a brand new episode. And if you don't do anything else this week, give your pets a big hug from us.